John Battaglia's execution has failed. A judge ruled the man convicted of murdering his two young daughters back in 2001 is competent to be put to death on December 7th. News 8's Rebecca Lopez tonight live at the courthouse with more on the judge's decision. Rebecca?
Well, Judge Robert Burns was very stern in his decision. He basically says that John Battaglia is faking his mental illness and also says that he is deceitful and cunning enough to carry out a ruse for years to avoid being executed. John Battaglia has avoided execution for 14 years, but today, Judge Robert Burns cleared the way for the child killer to die by lethal injection. Battaglia's lawyers argued in a hearing this week that he is too delusional and mentally ill to be executed, but Judge Burns didn't buy the argument. In a ruling, he said, it is undeniable that Battaglia has a motive to lie and or exaggerate his symptoms of mental illness.
Huntsville, Texas. February 1st, 2018. A 62-year-old man is strapped to a gurney. The room is dead quiet. Behind a thick pane of glass, a woman stands and watches. And then, he smiles at her. Not a nervous smile, not a desperate one, a deliberate smile, aimed directly at the mother of the two little girls he murdered. His name is John David Battaglia. And tonight, the state of Texas is about to execute him. But getting to this moment was not simple. For nearly 3 hours, lawyers filed emergency appeals, courts scrambled, and the clock kept moving. The legal system fought to the very last minute. When they finally asked him if he had any last words, he said no. Then he opened his mouth anyway. Well, hi Mary Jean, see y'all later, go ahead please. That was it. Here is what makes this case impossible to forget. After killing his two daughters, 9-year-old Mary Faith and 6-year-old Liberty, he did not run. He did not hide. He went and got tattoos. Before the night of the murders was over, a mother was forced to hear the worst sounds a parent could ever hear, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. Stay with me, because this story only gets harder to believe from here. And if you are new to this channel, welcome. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. To understand what happened on the night of May 2nd, 2001, you first need to know who was lost and who was left behind to carry it. Mary Jean Pearl was a woman who did everything right. She was grounded, sharp, and fiercely protective of her children. When the legal system gave her tools to use, she used them. When John David Battaglia crossed a line, she reported it. Every single time. She married Battaglia in 1991. They built a life together in Dallas, Texas. From the outside, it looked like a normal family. 2 daughters, a home, a future. But behind closed doors, the marriage was anything but normal. After 9 years, Pearl made the decision to leave. The divorce was finalized in 2000. She had 2 daughters with Battaglia. Mary Faith was born in January of 1992. By the time she was taken, she was 9 years old. Everyone who knew her described her as bright, curious, and full of love. She was the kind of child who asked questions and paid attention. On the last night of her life, she was handed a phone by her father and told what to say to her mother. Her final recorded words were, "No, Daddy, please don't do it." Liberty was born in January of 1995. She was 6 years old, the youngest. According to court records, she was shot 5 times. 5 times. Both girls were dropped off at Battaglia's apartment that evening by their mother. It was a routine dinner visit, the kind they had done many times before. Mary Jean had no reason to believe that night would be any different. After the divorce, the courts allowed Battaglia to continue seeing his daughters through unsupervised visits. No supervision, no checks, and in early 2001, when Pearl reported Battaglia for harassing her over the phone, triggering the arrest warrant that set everything in motion, those 2 little girls paid the price for it. That is the part that stays with you. John David Battaglia Jr. was not a stranger to the world. He was not invisible. He was not unknown to the system. He was born on August 2nd, 1955, in Enterprise, Alabama, into a military family. Growing up, he moved constantly, across states, even across to Germany. No stable community, no long-term roots, just a childhood spent packing up and starting over, wherever the military sent his father next. As an adult, he built what looked like a respectable life. He served in the United States Marine Corps. He trained as an accountant and worked in Dallas, Texas. To the people around him, he appeared professional, financially stable, and involved in his children's lives. But the record tells a very different story. His first marriage was to Michelle Getty, a lawyer, between 1985 and 1987. They had one daughter together, Christy. That marriage ended amid serious documented violence. Battaglia broke Michelle's nose. He attacked her outside their daughter's school. When she called police and sought his arrest, he ambushed her at a bus stop, a direct act of retaliation for involving the law. That pattern is important. Every single time Battaglia felt legally cornered, the violence got worse. In his 20s, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Years later, during court evaluations, professionals noted traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder, a deep sense of self-importance, and a striking absence of empathy for others. His daughter Christy would later confirm this diagnosis in her own testimony. 2 marriages, 2 women, 2 documented histories of violence, and yet, court after court continued allowing him unsupervised access to his children. The warning signs were never hidden. They were just never acted on in time. The system had every chance to stop what was coming. Every chance. Christmas Day, 1999. Battaglia arrived at Mary Jean Pearl's home with his daughter Christy. The plan was simple. Pick up Mary Faith and Liberty for a church visit. A routine holiday morning. Nothing unusual on paper. Then an argument broke out. What followed was not a heated exchange of words. Battaglia struck Pearl. He slammed her to the floor. He kicked her, while all 3 children stood in that same room, crying, begging him to stop. When police and medical staff documented her injuries, the list was long. Marks on her skull, a puncture wound on her heel, bruises on her arm, her finger, her shin, and both sides of her head. Pearl called 911 the moment he left. Now, here is where the system failed her. For that attack, Battaglia was convicted of misdemeanor assault. He received 2 years of probation. A protective order was issued, barring him from harassing Pearl and the girls, and prohibiting him from owning or possessing any firearms. But the court still allowed him to continue his unsupervised visits with Mary Faith and Liberty. No supervision, no monitoring, just carry on. That single decision would later be identified as the defining failure of this entire case. Then came Easter of 2001. Battaglia called Pearl and subjected her to a stream of verbal abuse over the phone. This time, she did not let it go. She reported it formally, to the police, and directly to his probation officer. An arrest warrant was issued for violating the terms of his probation. On May 2, 2001, a police officer contacted Battaglia and informed him he needed to surrender himself. That officer was delivering a routine notification. He had no way of knowing that his words that afternoon set the countdown in motion for one of the most devastating nights in Dallas criminal history. Before we go any further, let's be very clear about something. This was not a plot involving multiple people. There was no hired killer, no accomplice waiting in the shadows, no co-conspirator. John David Battaglia planned and carried out every part of that night entirely on his own. But make no mistake, it was planned. The dinner visit on May 2, 2001, was scheduled in advance. Mary Faith and Liberty were brought to that apartment because the visit was already on the calendar. Their presence that evening was not accidental. The phone call to Mary Jean Pearl was not a spontaneous decision. Forcing her to stay on the line, forcing her to hear what was happening, was a deliberate choice. That was part of it. When police later searched his truck, they found a fully loaded revolver. He did not stumble into that night unprepared, and inside the apartment where he killed his daughters, investigators recovered more than 12 firearms. Every single one of them was illegal for him to own under the terms of his protective order. Not 1, not 2, more than 12. Then there was the voicemail, recorded in a calm, steady voice just minutes after the shooting. "Good night, my little babies. You were very brave girls." That was not the voice of a man who lost control. That was intentional closure. What investigators found in that apartment didn't just tell them what happened. It told them exactly who this man had always been. Quick pause. If you are watching this channel for the very first time, drop a comment below and tell me how you found us. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button and stay with me, because we are just getting to the worst of it. May 2nd, 2001, Dallas, Texas. Mary Jean Pearl drove her two daughters to their father's apartment in Deep Ellum, a neighborhood in the heart of Dallas. Deep Ellum was the kind of place built from old warehouses converted into lofts, bars, and tattoo parlors. Music spilled out of doorways. Street noise filled every corner. It was the kind of neighborhood where sounds blended together and nothing stood out. Pearl dropped off Mary, Faith, and Liberty at Battaglia's apartment. It was a scheduled dinner visit, the same kind they had done many times before. Nothing felt different. Nothing felt wrong. She left her daughters at the door and drove away. She had no idea that was the last time she would ever see them alive. At some point that evening, Battaglia picked up the phone and called Mary Jean Pearl. He put the call on speaker. Then he handed the phone to 9-year-old Mary Faith and told her exactly what to say. Her small voice came through the line. "Mommy, why do you want Daddy to go to jail?" On the other end, Pearl felt the panic rise immediately. She recognized what was happening. She begged him, "Stop. Whatever he was thinking, stop. Do not do this." Then she heard her daughter's voice one final time. "No, Daddy. Please don't. Don't do it." A gunshot. Then screaming. Then more gunshots. Then silence. Mary Jean Pearl stood on the other end of that phone line and heard every single second of it. Court records confirm she could not see what was happening. She could not reach through the phone. She could not intervene in any way. There was nothing she could do but listen. The moment the line went quiet, she called 911. Her voice was broken. She tried to explain to the operator what she had just heard, something no parent should ever have to put into words. Police arrived at the Deep Ellum apartment. Inside, they found Mary, Faith, and Liberty. Mary Faith had been shot 3 times. Liberty had been shot 5 times. Both girls were gone. Officers also recovered multiple firearms inside the apartment, every single one of them illegal for Battaglia to own under the terms of his protective order. He had been banned from possessing weapons. The apartment told a very different story. And then, this is the part that stops people cold. John David Battaglia left that apartment. He did not call for help. He did not turn himself in. He went to a bar with his girlfriend. He sat down. He had a drink. According to court records, he behaved as though the evening was completely ordinary. After the bar, he made his way to a tattoo parlor in another part of Dallas. He sat down in the artist's chair and made his request, 2 large red roses on his left arm. He told the artist they were a tribute to his daughters. He sat calmly through the entire session. The artist had no idea what had happened just hours earlier, only a few miles away. When police finally caught up with Battaglia outside that tattoo parlor, the ink on his arm was still fresh. It took 4 officers to physically restrain him. A fully loaded revolver was found in his vehicle parked nearby. That same night, before any of this caught up with him, Battaglia had made one more move. He called the answering machine in his daughter's bedroom at Mary Jean Pearl's house and left a message. His voice was calm, steady, unhurried. "Good night, my little babies. You were very brave girls." Pearl heard it the following morning. Court records would later identify that recording as one of the most damning pieces of evidence presented at trial. Not because it was loud or threatening, but because of how calm it was. Because of what it proved about the state of mind of the man who left it. Outside that tattoo parlor, John David Battaglia was a completely different man. The calm, composed person who had sat quietly in the artist's chair minutes earlier was gone. When officers moved in to arrest him, he fought back hard. It took 4 officers to bring him down and restrain him. 4. The contrast between those two versions of him, relaxed in the tattoo chair, violent at the point of arrest, was not lost on anyone working that scene. He expressed no remorse. He asked no questions about his daughters, not a single one. The physical evidence spoke for itself. A fully loaded revolver sat in his nearby vehicle. Back at the Deep Ellum apartment, investigators recovered more than 12 firearms, every single one of them a direct violation of his protective order. He had been legally banned from possessing weapons. He had built an arsenal anyway. Meanwhile, Mary Jean Pearl woke up the next morning carrying the weight of what she had heard on that phone call the night before. And then she pressed play on the answering machine in her daughter's bedroom. She heard his voice, calm, gentle, saying goodnight to girls he had already killed. Despite everything she was going through, Pearl began cooperating with investigators immediately. Christy, Battaglia's daughter from his first marriage, would also eventually step forward and become a significant voice when the case went to trial. Investigators found no insurance policy, no financial angle, no outside motive. This was not about money. This was about revenge, pure and simple, against the woman who had finally pushed back. The jury would hear that answering machine recording played in open court. What happened in that room after the recording played is something no one who was present would ever forget. Some cases take months to build. This was not one of them. From the very first hours, investigators were working with an unusually complete picture. Mary Jean Pearl's 911 call was on record. Her account of what she heard on that phone call was detailed, consistent, and unshakable. The voicemail Battaglia left on the answering machine in his daughter's bedroom was sitting right there, in his own voice. And the physical evidence inside the Deep Ellum apartment, the bodies, the illegal firearms, the crime scene itself, left very little room for doubt. Battaglia never offered a serious alibi. His movements that night were fully confirmed and documented. Bar, tattoo parlor, arrest. Every step of his evening was accounted for. The question investigators focused on was not who did it, it was whether it was planned. Court records would show that the prosecution argued yes. Every detail of that night pointed to deliberate design. The scheduled visit, the phone call, the loaded revolver in the truck. None of it looked like a man who simply lost control in a single moment. In custody, Battaglia was uncooperative. He showed no acknowledgement of his daughter's deaths in his early interactions with authorities. No grief. No questions. Nothing. There were no competing suspects, no conflicting accounts, no alternative theories to chase down. The arrest warrant notification, delivered to Battaglia earlier that same day, was established in court records as the direct trigger for everything that followed that evening. The case moved toward trial faster than most cases of this scale ever do. In most criminal cases, investigators spend weeks, sometimes months, searching for the person responsible. They chase leads, they follow dead ends, they wait for something to break. This case was different. John David Battaglia was arrested the same night his daughters were killed. There was no manhunt, no mystery to solve. The investigation that followed was not about finding the suspect. It was about building an airtight case against him. And that is exactly what happened. Forensic audio analysis confirmed the voicemail recording was authentic. His voice, his words, his message. Every firearm recovered from the apartment was traced directly back to him, each one a documented violation of his protective order. Mary Jean Pearl's full account was corroborated point by point, by the 911 call timeline, by the physical evidence, and by the crime scene itself. Prosecutors formally charged Battaglia with capital murder, the charge used in Texas when 2 or more people are killed in a single criminal act. The grand jury returned an indictment without complications. Trial was set for Dallas County, but something else was already happening quietly in those early attorney meetings. Battaglia began constructing narratives that denied or minimized his role in what happened that night. At the time, they seemed like standard legal posturing. 16 years later, those same narratives would return, and nearly stop his execution entirely. The trial of John David Battaglia opened in April of 2002 in Dallas County. Lead prosecutor Howard Blackman stood before the jury with a straightforward argument. This was not a father who snapped under pressure. This was not a man who lost control in a single desperate moment. This was revenge. Cold, step-by-step revenge against the woman who had sought his arrest. And he used his own daughters to carry it out. The evidence Blackman presented was devastating. Mary Jean Pearl took the stand and walked the jury through every second of that phone call. What she heard, what she felt, and what she was powerless to do from the other end of the line. Her testimony was detailed, consistent, and deeply difficult to hear. Then the answering machine recording was played in open court. The jury heard Battaglia's calm, steady voice addressing his daughters after he had already killed them. "Good night, my little babies. You were very brave girls." The room did not need much more than that. The defense pointed to his bipolar disorder diagnosis, asking the jury to consider it as a factor that impaired his judgment that night. The jury considered it. Then they set it aside. Deliberations lasted approximately 20 minutes. Guilty of capital murder. The sentence handed down was death. At sentencing, Mary Jean Pearl addressed Battaglia directly in that courtroom. She told him that the next time she would see him would be when they put the needle in his arm, but that she had no plans to be there for it. It was the words of a mother, stripped of everything, speaking with the full weight of what she had lost. She meant it at the time, but 16 years is a long time, and when February 1st, 2018 finally came, Mary Jean Pearl walked into that witness room anyway. After the verdict, John David Battaglia was transferred to the Polunsky unit in Texas, home to the state's death row. Life there meant 23 hours a day, locked inside a single cell, 1 hour outside in an enclosed yard. Near total isolation, day after day, year after year. For 16 years that was his world. And yet, in a 2014 interview with the Dallas Morning News, Battaglia spoke about Mary Faith and Liberty as though they were still part of his life. He called them his best little friends. He said he kept their photos displayed in his cell. Then he said this, "I don't feel like I killed them. I'm a bit blank about what happened." Calm, unbothered, as though the answering machine recording, made in his own voice, minutes after the shooting, simply did not exist. During his competency hearings, court records revealed the full picture of how Battaglia explained his conviction to evaluators. He believed it was the result of a vast conspiracy, a conspiracy involving both of his ex-wives, his own defense attorneys, the prosecutors, the trial judge, the jury, and the Ku Klux Klan. He also claimed he had been drugged on the night of the murders and had no memory of what took place. In March of 2016, Battaglia had an execution date. Hours before the needle was scheduled, the United States Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a stay. His legal team needed time to develop the argument that he was not mentally competent to be executed. Under the law, a condemned man must understand that he is about to be executed and have a rational understanding of why. A Dallas district court held a full hearing. 3 out of 4 psychologists who examined Battaglia testified that he was not competent for execution, that his delusional disorder was genuine. Judge Robert Burns disagreed. He ruled that Battaglia was highly intelligent and was faking or deliberately amplifying his symptoms to avoid execution. The key piece of evidence supporting that conclusion was a recorded prison phone call in which Battaglia told his own father that the death penalty was, in his exact words, a damn chess game. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld that ruling in September of 2017, issuing a 78-page opinion. Judge Elsa Alcala dissented, arguing the court had applied the wrong legal standard, and the case deserved deeper review. She was outvoted. A December 2016 execution date had also been delayed during that same appellate process. On February 1st, 2018, the day of his final scheduled execution, his lawyers filed one last appeal, arguing that Texas had used expired and relabeled pentobarbital in recent executions, putting Battaglia at risk of unnecessary suffering. The United States Supreme Court denied it just before 9 o'clock that evening. Every door was closed. The execution had been scheduled for early evening. It did not begin until nearly 3 hours later, the courts working through every final filing to the very last minute. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice spokesman described Battaglia in those final hours as nervous but conversational. He asked about the status of his appeals. He asked to use the phone. He was, by all accounts, still looking for a way out until there was none left. Mary Jean Pearl, who 16 years earlier had stood in that Dallas courtroom and told Battaglia she had no intention of watching him die, walked into the witness room. She had changed her mind. When the warden asked Battaglia if he had a final statement, he said no. Then he turned his head toward the glass, looked directly at Mary Jean Pearl, and spoke anyway. "Well, hi, Mary Jean. See y'all later. Go ahead, please." Pentobarbital was injected at 9:18 in the evening. Battaglia closed his eyes, then opened them. He smiled. He looked up and asked, "Am I still alive?" Then, "Oh, here, I feel it," gasping. Then stillness. At 9:40 in the evening, John David Battaglia was pronounced dead. 22 minutes after the injection began, Mary Jean Pearl stood behind that glass and watched until it was over. Then she turned away and said, "I've seen enough of him." 4 months after burying her daughters, Mary Jean Pearl was not done fighting. She walked into the Texas state legislature and testified before committee after committee, pushing for a bill that would change how family courts in Texas handled parental access when a documented history of domestic violence existed. She had lost her daughters. She was not going to let another family lose theirs for the same reason. Texas Senate Bill 140 was signed into law on September 1, 2001, just 4 months after Mary Faith and Liberty were killed. It closed the gaps that had allowed a man with Battaglia's documented record of violence to walk freely in and out of his children's lives without supervision. Mary Jean Pearl turned the worst thing that ever happened to her into law. That is not a small thing. Now, John David Battaglia spent his final years telling anyone who would listen that he had no memory of killing his daughters, no rational understanding of what he had done. But his own voice, recorded minutes after the shots were fired, told a completely different story. He addressed those little girls directly, calmly, tenderly, as though they could still hear him. The system he called a damn chess game made its final move on February 1, 2018. He chose revenge over his daughters, and the only life it ultimately destroyed was his own. Mary Faith was 9 years old. Liberty was 6. Neither of them had any part in the legal dispute that took their lives, but their names now live inside Texas law and inside this story. Tell me in the comments, which moment in this case hit you the hardest? Was it the phone call, the tattoo parlor, or the voicemail she heard the next morning? I want to know. If this story moved you, please give it a like. It helps more people find this channel. Subscribe if you have not already, and hit the notification bell so you are always first to know when a new story drops. I will see you in the next one.